Sister, 26th of October 937. Who is the candles guttered as a door opened. The king had instructed that he be left all night in the chapel to pray. Who? He added, as a chink of metal sounded behind him. There are no guards, the voice replied. You trust to God alone. From his kneeling position before the altar, King Aethelstan, grandson of the great King Alfred, on the eve of the battle that had been long overdue, drew himself to his feet. He crossed to the altar and took up one of the candle standards. The tallow made a trail of stench between the altar and the nave. Who? He demanded. An unavowed subject, the intruder told him. One who has never acquiesced to your overlordship. She paused, then added, one who would pray with you. As Aethelstan moved the light to the face of the disturber of his peace, Osrith dropped to her knees. Lord King, I owe you, through your aunt, service to Mercia, for the murder of a lord-in-law Deathleard's service, at harvest time, in the year of our Lord God 910, at a place north of Salop by the name of Worm. Osrith remained with her head bowed, her words cracking in her throat as she offered herself humbly to the service of a king. It had never happened before. Before this, Osrith had fallen into circumstances. By leaving what was the relative safety of Caerleguilid, she had made a conscious decision. I come to fulfill the service I owe to your kingdom, your homeland, King Aethelstan, she continued. I am but a poor, landless refugee seeking only to serve where I see fit. Osrith, for she had seen what Constantine and his allies were prepared to do to clear the land of the Saxons and the Angles, and she was glad, so very glad, that she had chosen what she had chosen, a state called England, under King Aethelstan, who had brought leadership and vision and justice. Could Constantine claim he was doing that? By what she had seen, he was not. In fact, there was not even one united leader around whom the Cymric could focus. Yes, that might have been fanciful, that might have, in effect, been Constantine, for it was he who could pull each and every one of his allies to him, where none of them could do the same for each other. But Constantine, Christian as he was, had not shown caution, not advised restraint on any one of his allies. As she had ridden down from Caerleguilid, she was in the company of many hundreds of refugees from towns and villages in the west of Northumbria, and not all of them were Saxons. Settled Norse and Danes too, and groups of disparate Cymric civilians living in the higher ground north of Momcista were limping south with their mean and meagre possessions being all they could carry, or all they had left after their houses being raided and sacked by anyone, with no law, only their own consciences. And they were not very moral consciences. Babies, dead on the roadside, women dead, having been despoiled, men speared and left where they died, animals that might have been useful, killed, houses burned to the ground, possessions destroyed, not taken such as those might, for survival, but for mischief, for horror. It was as if the worst of the great Dane army that Alfred's brothers had faced in the decades when Ethelfled and Edward were born were coming back and reminding a country that had lived in relative peace for several decades that horror and death could come, and was coming, back. So, hungry, for no settlement that had been lucky enough to survive the raids was going to be stupid enough to let a stranger in, nor even sell them food, and tired, Osrith had got as far as Blackburn and eventually sold her horse to a man in exchange for some of the food his wife had been cooking. If you're foolish enough to hang around and eat it, he said to her, as they left on the horse she had stolen from Caerleguilid. But, it was the boy that had been staked to a cross and left to die, now long gone with no hope of revival, just outside Rumfcofer, that eventually got to Osrith. He looked so much like she remembered young Finan looking, and she wondered where he was. Safe with Utad, she hoped, and not mixed up in any of this raiding, nor with Constantine and his men. For, if he was, he may well be facing his father and his brother across the battlefield, Osrith thought. And herself, too, for it had been that which had made Osrith know for sure which side she was on, and it was not on the side of those who had gone Viking in Northumbria and the northern lands of Mercia. It was to Aethelstan she was going to turn. And Osrith knew that, if the tables had been turned, and the last he had seen of Osrith was dancing with the Gaels at Dunnottar, that she would not believe he had come as a willing ally in what was likely to be the greatest battle in living memory. So, it was not Aethelstan to whom she must speak, but to someone else who lived at Seaster, who worked at Seaster. Would it not have been simpler for her to have stayed that time, when her nephew, Utad's eldest son, had offered for her too? Perhaps he would do so again, and maybe Osrith would take up the offer. But now, she knew she must try. She wanted to fight, not retire to a convent. So she needed to ask Bishop Oswald, formerly Utad's eldest son with Gisela, formerly Utad, to take her to see his father, who would, no doubt, be somewhere in the plain of the low-lying land south of the Merse, which she could see from the ridge on the northern side of the river, the Northumbrian side. It had to be him, for she knew Utad would not believe her, either, especially when he heard, as Aethelstan will have heard, that her claim to the lands of Caelig Willid, and acceptance of dower marriage to Domhnall. Because, why would anyone believe her, Osrith, who had fought so long and so hard to be the Lady of Berwick, who had, she now realized, condoned raids into southern Northumbria and even further south, into Lindsey, by her people? Seaster would be easy to get to. Convincing her nephew that she was a refugee would be the hard part, so long she had been an ally of Constantine. That was what Osrith had thought a week before. But she had been wrong, so very wrong. The worst had been that Utad had refused to see her. So she made as if to say goodbye to Bishop Oswald, and take herself south, claiming she had friends in Wessex. But it was a lie. Osrith was going nowhere except to petition the one person who could help her. And for that, she had to offer him something of worth. Aethelstan valued oaths being honored, what king wouldn't? And Osrith owed Mercia most of her death sentence, commuted by the Lady of the Mercians, service to the realm of 2 years. Then, King Aethelstan, Rex Totius Britanniae, concluded, "Pray with me,